back to Bread and Butter, everybody. We're serving up the basics for Hearthstone improvement in episode 74. And as always, I am joined by my co-host, Tito Santana. Tito, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. 74, that's a big number. Yeah, we're getting there.
Is. And we have a very special guest, Dankest Dad.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
Doing great, and I'm really happy to be here recording. It's not a week without a podcast, and this week I get two, so really happy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show. So what have you been doing inside of Hearthstone recently?
Well, I have most recently been getting decimated in a THL match by my good friend and co-host, Mr. Ron Mexico, and after that, I had to take it to ladder, and, well, 0-3 in the match, 3-0 on the ladder. What can you do?
2 out of 3 of us have lost to Ron Mexico this year. That's for sure. Show.
Yours was pro, right?
Yeah, mine was pro.
Well, he's a good player. Not all that surprising.
Yes.
And so he's a friend of the show. He's been on a couple times. He's never been on the same time Doc has been on. So is Doc Ron Mexico? We'll never know.
Maybe.
I was just about to ask Doc what he's been playing in Hearthstone, but he's taking a big old swig of some apple juice or something. So Doc, what have you been playing in Hearthstone?
Battlegrounds. I really like where BG's is at right now. I've been trying to force dragons still. Dragons are just my favorite tribe. I was getting a little freaky with it. I was trying to do like permanent stat gain with dragons and murlocs. It did okay. I got second place. But it wasn't a close second, which kind of feels bad. But number go up, and number go up means I'm doing something right. So I'm okay with that, and I just take the lessons I learned for minions that I was buying and trying to make work, and we'll adjust that in future BG games. Tito, how about yourself?
Competitive play this week, I am 5-0. We won our THL match 3-0, and we won our Coin Concede Listener Series match 2-0. And we did not bring good decks. Like, they're good decks, but they're not like super meta decks. I brought my own version of the Secret Egg Reno Hunter by accident because I thought that was the newer one, but it was the one that I kind of made up that had some weird stuff in it, like the Spellstone that every secret you play, or you upgrade it by playing secrets and you get the wolves. It had some jank in it. But we won with that. We won with Dragon Druid, which I've been playing a lot of. And we won with what else did we win with? We won with a really janky jank seems to be the word today. Buff Demon Hunter, but not the ones that you're used to seeing, a little bit different there. So it was a lot of fun. I have also been kind of looking at, I think I talked about this a little bit last week, but my number at Legend had been going down and down and down, and down in the bad way. And I was down to about 12,000 or so, but I looked at my stats and I'm like, I'm actually not playing that bad. I was playing right around 500, so I was either a couple games below 500 or a couple games above 500, and mostly playing either Mining Paladin or Dragon Druid. And with the Dragon Druid, I'm doing really well. And now, just realizing that I'm not playing bad, my number is just where my MMR is, and not to get kind of upset about that, I've been doing really well. I'm now, I think, up to like 85,000, and we're moving in the right direction, and we're winning with Dragon Druid. And it's not the most exciting deck, but I really like it, and it's fun. So I'm sticking with it. But, Doc, what have you been doing outside of Hearthstone?
Yeah, so it's been as always pretty busy. Cortland's youngest brother graduated from high school. So that was really cool. He also had state track. So that was very awesome for him. He had his last dance recital with his dance studio. So we went and watched that, and as always, he's a magnificent dancer, especially for only dancing for 2 years. And it was just fun to get to see him do all his dances again, and to see the solo that him and his girlfriend did, which won them a national title. It's a very, very good dance, and I was happy I got to see it one final time. Also, I got some new pets. I got 2 Australian white tree frogs. They're adorable and share a brain cell between the two of them. Their names are Yargle and Gitrug, both being cards for Magic the Gathering that are frogs or frog adjacent. But yeah, they're just cute little froggy boys, and excited to see them grow. They can live for a pretty long time. They can also get pretty big. They can get like 4 or 5 inches long, and they can get pretty rotund as well. So it's been something that Cortland and I have talked about for a long time, because as people know, I keep crested geckos, and I have 4 of them right now, and their temperature requirements are generally basically the same. The frogs just have a slightly higher low end temperature, which is still within the range of the crested gecko, like healthy temperature range. So it's wasn't that big of an issue. They both the geckos and the frogs eat crickets and like dubias and stuff. And so we have some crickets for them that we're going to like gut load and powder with calcium and everything to make sure that we're feeding them as healthy of food as we can for them. And just played more Magic with my IRL pod last night. We did a Neon Dynasty Kamigawa draft. It was more of a sealed with how we actually decided to do it, but it was a lot of fun. The box we had got was a pretty good box. We had a Boseiju, a full art, White Channel land. I forget what the name of that land is. And then we got a couple other mythics. It was a pretty good box. It was fun games, but some slow games because the aggro decks were both samurai warrior based, so we could only attack for maximum value with 1 creature per turn. So the aggro decks were pretty slow for being aggro. And then we played a game afterwards with like our real decks, and I got to bring my pet deck, which I made off of the new mount mechanic within Magic. It did pretty well. It didn't win, but it was like the early game threat and like the mid game threat, which felt pretty nice. Just my play group, their decks are very strong and have cards that are worth significantly more than the cards I have in my vehicle deck. But it was a fun time. Like, it's not about winning. It's just about having fun and getting to do the thing. And the person that was the biggest problem died in a single turn from their own card, and it was wonderful. Yeah. My life outside of Hearthstone is always busy and super fun. Dankest Dad, what have you been doing outside Hearthstone?
Well, I've been enjoying the Memorial Day weekend. Finally got a nice day in Ohio yesterday, so my wife and I went to the Columbus Zoo. Got to check that out, which was cool. And then today was playing some card games. So,
Heck yeah.
Local level, I play Universes. Not sure if that's familiar, but a few weeks ago, I think one of you might have mentioned that weird card game with Street Fighter stuff where you were blocking and attacking and such. This is that game. That is the one I play regularly with my friends here in Columbus. So,
what did you say the name was?
Universes.
No, that's not the game I'm talking about, but I did find out the name of the game. So while you're talking, hold on. You continue on. I'll get back to you with that. I have it.
Oh, my interest is piqued. But anyway, played Universes at my local. Brought out a little bit more of a casual deck. Had a good time though. Went 1-0-2. Lots of draws, but hey, not too shabby. And yeah, pretty soon I'll be enjoying tomorrow and making a casserole, hanging out with my niece, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law. So yeah,
heck yeah. I might have also brought up a fighting card game. There was one that Edelweiss brought to BlizzCon, and it was super fun. She knew the deck, or she knew all the decks very, very well. But it was very much like you could play an attack, but someone could play a block, but they could also play like a parry card.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I think they got it from a Kickstarter or something. I can't remember where she said she got it. But it was a lot of fun. But if that seems like your thing, I'm sure if you would ask her, she would know exactly what you'd be asking about, because I just can't for life of me remember the name.
Was it the Guilty Gear game by any chance?
I don't. I'll look. Maybe I'll also do some sleuthing.
Well, I've done my sleuthing while he's doing that, and the name of the game was Yomi, Yomi.
Oh, Yomi. Okay, Sid Meier. Very cool.
Yeah, it was done by a guy named David Sirloin, who used to work at Capcom.
Yes, Street Fighter 2.
Yeah, so...
Yeah. Have you read Playing to Win?
No.
So that's his book. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah, so but that was the game, and because I actually... So funny, I reached out to, as I mentioned, I'm looking for a new position. I have about a week left on my job. I've handed over all my responsibilities, so I'm just looking for things. I reached out to my friend that I used to play with. I was like, hey, do you remember the name of that game? He's like, yeah, it's Yumi, and blah, blah, blah. So that was really nice. Outside of that, looking for a job. You hear anything? You know where to find me.
I think we're talking about the same game, Tito.
Are we really?
I think so, because I'm looking at this and it seems familiar.
Maybe. I just remember. So basically, I had played Magic: The Gathering through about Ice Age, and I played. So I remember when I was in Bosnia in '97. I won a tournament over there in the MWR tent, and I had my old collection, and I'm missing a little bit of it. I can't find like my Planeswalkers. I know I had a couple. So as Wicked said, there's always a box somewhere. And I haven't found that box yet. I'm hoping that I still have that box. I'm hoping my stepdaughter didn't take them and sell them when she was 17. You never know. But when I went back, I would say now probably like 15 years, I went to the local Magic shop and I started playing Friday Night Magic and some other tournaments. And I also ended up, making friends with people there. And one of the guys that worked there, he introduced me to Yumi or Yomi or whatever it was. And every time like we were just kind of hanging around, I was like, let's play some of that. It was a super, super fun game. And I'm glad, I think we've talked about that enough. This is not a Yomi podcast yet. Outside of that, I have been doing basic yard work, how it is. I had a beautiful weekend. It's going to rain tomorrow, Memorial Day. You'll have already experienced that. But I did the yard, took everything out of the shed, switched it over from summer to winter. We're getting ready for a yard sale next week, so dust stuff around that. We had my grandson yesterday. We went to the local trampoline park. He got to burn off a lot of energy. Today I grilled a bunch of stuff. We did some mushrooms and onions and some steak and some sweet teriyaki ribs and apple sausage, and it was my favorite thing. One of my favorite things to do is to make way too much barbecue food and just have it for like a week. And like for the next every day, it's like, what do I want? I'm hungry. I've already cooked a lot of food. I'm happy. Outside of that, in the card game space, as I've mentioned, and we've talked about a little bit, my son has been getting more and more into Pokemon. And mostly for the collecting, but if we're going to get a card game, I'll be darned if we're not going to play that card game. So we've played a little bit of, trying to learn, but it's basically between me and him. Like, it's hard to figure out all the rules because it's weird. So I picked up the online game. So we've been started playing that and going through the tutorial, and now we've played a couple games. And he actually then went over, and every pack of Pokemon cards, you get like a little online thing, and yep. he had like a stack of like 70 of them. So I just spent the like a day, couple hours just going through them. We got a bunch of packs and a bunch of things right there. So we now have an instant collection that we're not going to spend any money on it. Pokemon's more than expensive enough on its own. But hey, this helps us, and it seems relatively, as far as card games go, it seems relatively not greedy, if I can say that, because like most of them have like the bundles and all that, but so far I have not seen a place where I can spend actual money. It's like you can get money, you can get there's 3 different currencies, and then the premium pass even is like one type of currency. I'm like, well, I should be able to buy that currency, right? And I'm just trying to figure it out, and I couldn't figure out anywhere to buy that currency. It's just you earn the currencies and they do different things, and so I kind of like that. So there's no pressure there to make a purchase, because sometimes it's like, well, do I just buy the premium pass because it's worth it or whatnot? But none of that. So I was very happy. But no one cares about that. What we want to know is who Dankest Dad is. So Doc, why don't we ask him a few questions so our listeners get to know a little bit about him.
Yeah, so first question. By what metric are you the dankest of all dads?
All right, so you got to get the elephant out of the room first and foremost. So I'm a bit of a fraud. I am neither dank nor a dad, but I feel like I'm the only person who, when people read their username, is like, yeah, that guy is both those things. Couldn't be any other way. So I ended up picking that tag for a Smash tournament back in the day when I was playing Super Smash Brothers competitively in college. And one of my shticks that I had with my friends growing up and tried to bring to my college roommates was making a name that filled the character limit and made the other person laugh. And if you could make them laugh when they read the bracket, we'd pay the other person's entry fees. And I got got my entry fee paid for Dankest Dad, and it's been going strong for 9 years.
That's awesome.
But yeah, not a dad. I have lovely nieces and nephews. I have a lovely wife and lovely 4 cats. And unfortunately, I do not partake in any dank activities. So yeah, just a boring old dude.
So what got you started in card games, and how did you find your way to Hearthstone?
So first card game that I ever played was Yu-Gi-Oh! Back in the day when I was 9 years old. I saw the anime. It was the phenomenon sweeping my elementary school. And I went to my Yu-Gi-Oh! Local at the ripe old age of 9. And I managed to go 1 and 2. And my mom was like, this is for nerds. And I was like, okay, because I was 9. And I didn't touch a card game again for about 11 years until a fortuitous situation happened where within roughly about a week of each other, one of my roommates got access to the Hearthstone closed alpha, and my other roommate showed up with a box of bulk magic cards. And from there on, things were never the same. And I started playing Hearthstone as soon as open beta came. I started playing Magic with some of my friends, doing pre-releases and drafts, and then playing pretty much every card game I could get my hands on afterwards.
I'm a little behind, and I'm kind of sad I missed this because we even queued up something specially for you.
Smoke weed every day.
Anyway,
hey, you got that to work finally.
Well, no, so I have enough that I can. If it's less than 5 seconds, I can get that on the soundboard in Discord. But if it's something like that's more than 5 seconds, I have to use an external one, and I can't get that audio synced up. If it's short, I have some very vulgar smarms quotes that I can't play on the show.
She's full of them. Love her.
He was an awesome guest on our show, and oh boy, our conversation went places.
It's the smarms effect. It's the only way to describe it. So how did you get started with Amberflight Gaming and the Roundtable podcast?
So, mostly I started actually with THL about 3 years ago now. Wow. And was doing some casting and, playing some Hearthstone. And eventually the time came when Ron and Don were looking to get another host for their podcast. And, having built a relationship with Ron, playing with him in THL, and knowing Don from a few casting things there, they felt that I would be a good fit. And sure enough, I was like, let's go. So join Amberflight Gaming. Shortly after, join the Roundtable. And yeah, it has been an absolutely awesome time. Everyone there is incredible. And yeah, it's cool to see we're growing as well. We got Alex Underhill, aka Lexicon, for VGC now. He's competing with Nails this weekend in LA for Pokemon video game. And yeah, they both day-two'd. So
heck yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great time.
So what is your favorite class, favorite deck, and favorite archetype?
Okay, so if I had to pick a favorite class, it really just boils down to wanting to tank up to rank up. I love Warrior. I love gaining armor. there's just something really, that gets the neurons going when you see an armor number that's bigger than your health number. It's like, wow, I've really done it. Because for some reason, like there are some people who really like to see the other number go down. I'm the one who likes to see my number go to the stratosphere. And Warrior has just done it for me. So I think Odd Warrior is probably the deck that I have played the most games on at any given point when it was in standard, and really was one of my favorites.
Now, since you're talking about you like to see your armor numbers grow up, did you like playing that druid that had the bees in it?
Oh, Linecracker?
Linecracker.
So I wasn't really a big Linecracker fan, but I will say I did have a wild game where I was playing a Highlander druid, and my opponent was playing Linecracker druid, and they did the Linecracker combo, and I still won. I just chewed through 1,300 health and eventually got there. It was a slog, but I wish I wasn't playing on mobile, because that would have been one of the most epic replays ever.
Heck yeah. Your favorite, you said favorite deck of all time. What other game modes, if any, do you engage with in Hearthstone?
So I kind of touch them all. So Wild is probably the mode that I engage with the least, but I usually do grab a couple games every season. I've played it in THL in the past, and it still is a lot of fun. Like, the play patterns that you get in Wild are not quite the same as Standard, and while the format's not as balanced, I do think the decks are more interesting to play, and it's definitely a fun change of pace. I play a lot of Arena, used to play a ton of Duels, and when it was out, it was my mode that I played more than any other. And right now, I'm playing tons of Battlegrounds and Battlegrounds duos with friends. So, yeah, just everything that Hearthstone has, I'm playing it.
Awesome. So what is something that our listeners would find surprising to learn about you?
That's an interesting one. I think it might be just how broad my range of interest is. I think that when someone else is enthusiastic about something, I also get enthusiastic. And for that reason, whenever I've had friends in life, I have always picked up the things that they like. So on top of, card games, I'm really big into other board games, tabletop RPGs, pretty much video games of all kinds. The usual gamut of TV and movies, but also sports and everything else. And I do think that, if someone has something that they like and want to talk about, even if it's a little bit, off the beaten path as a hobby or as an interest, I love to hear about it. And it makes my day to see people, just like something and want to talk about it so much that they do.
Awesome.
Well, that's fantastic. And the reason why we have Dankest Dad here today is, one, because he is a fantastic person and individual and likes to play the games that we like to play, but also we thought it would be an interesting idea to talk about other card games. Now, I know what you're saying. This is a Hearthstone podcast. Yes, we are focused on Hearthstone. But what are some things you can learn from these other games that are out there? Maybe you've come from a background of Magic. Many people have. Maybe you played Runeterra first. Maybe you're playing Lorcana right now. What are some lessons that you can, one, learn from those games and bring them over to Hearthstone? Or maybe even so, if you started on Hearthstone and you're branching out, what are some lessons from Hearthstone that you can bring to those other games? So, one of the nice things about Hearthstone is that it's a digital space. So while, for example, Magic the Gathering, it does have an online client, it can do some kind of cool things with how it works. It's still bound by the rules of the fact that it is a paper-based game first. So it has to work within that boundary, even online. Hearthstone, it gets to generate things like Discover. Like, that is something that Magic would not be able to do on the level that Hearthstone does, because how would that work? Right? And there's also some other things like that. So what we wanted to do is just touch on some of these other games and see if there's things that are similar to Hearthstone that you can maybe learn things. So, Dank, with all the games out there, are there games that are I'm assuming that there are some that are more similar to Hearthstone and some that are quite different than Hearthstone. So why don't we start there? What are some games, if we're talking about similar games, what are some similar games and different games?
Sure. So immediately off the bat, at least for the more recognizable games in this day and age, Magic and Lorcana immediately come to mind as being fairly similar. Lorcana does not have the same sort of end goal of beat your opponent's face in. Instead, you're trying to collect lore. But the way in which you play cards, the way in which your access to a resource continues to increase is pretty similar. Magic even has in their digital client a mode called Alchemy now, where they've started exploring with some of these digital-only features. And they actually do have a feature that's very similar to Discover, where you have a pool of token cards that you can pick from for some effects or generate. So a lot of those fundamentals there will play out. Legends of Runeterra is another one that I felt was kind of similar. While there are some very important differences, the ramping mana system still goes about the same way. The way stats are distributed by mana cost is comparable. And if you have a good sense of Hearthstone fundamentals, the same things that are good in Runeterra tend to be good in Hearthstone and vice versa. So they're a good way to get a feel for the game. As for different games, I play Universes myself, and Flesh and Blood is another very popular game. And these games are called hero games. So you have a leader or a hero that's your primary character, which might seem kind of like Hearthstone at first. But the thematic of the game is that your two characters are going at it fighting each other, and there are not minions or creatures doing it for you. You guys are playing attacks, trying to block each other's attacks and slug it out. So the whole structure of a board that you know and love for Hearthstone is not there at all. The game state is represented in a totally different way. Pokemon is another game that has a sort of similar feel where, once again, there isn't the traditional board. You have your active Pokemon, you have your bench Pokemon, and the access to card draw and actions is not constrained by a resource. It's only your attack at the end of the turn. So the entire way you need to think about Pokemon is very, very different from Hearthstone. And, as Tito may have alluded to, it's a different ballgame. And I also happened to get the Pokemon TCG Live tutorial last night, going through it myself and playing with one of my teammates, Based Ink, on AFG. And was learning the ropes for a game I haven't played in about a decade. And boy, has it changed a lot, but at least on a fundamental level, it's the same rules. So, yeah, I think that as a general rule of thumb, though, games that are like Hearthstone tend to have a board, have creatures, and you are attacking each other. And games that are different will be playing with some other sort of, flavor in terms of what is going on.
But there's some, even the games that are different have similarities with Hearthstone. Like, for example, Pokemon you just brought up. Pokemon is a lot like Hearthstone in the way that the turns are differentiated, right? So yes. Your turn is you're in a silo on your turn. Anything your opponent cannot counterspell or, play blue cards to make your life miserable. Your turn is your turn, and when it's over, when you do your attack, your turn is over. That's the same thing at Hearthstone. But it also has some similarities to, say, Pokemon has some similarities to Magic, where while it's not quite the same as lands, like if you don't have your energy, then you can't do the things, and you have to have the ability. From what I'm learning in my short period of time, a lot of times your energy goes into your graveyard, and then your graveyard, you need cards to bring them back, and you only have it's a small amount of energy, and some things require. So there's a lot of parallels. Even when they're different, they're the same on some levels. I think that you could probably draw a line, and in any of these games, even the ones that are different, there are probably ways to kind of point and say, yeah, there are. It's not quite the same as like Magic to Hearthstone, but there's probably a line somewhere where you can say, yeah, these things are similar. Where does Lorcana fit in all this?
So I think that, like I said, it's pretty close to Hearthstone in the sense that sort of the gameplay pattern is similar in that you dictate the attacker. So one big difference between games is that in a games like Magic, the defender is the one who dictates combat. You declare your attacks, and the defender says where they go. In Lorcana, it's not quite the same. It's more like Hearthstone, where you're like, I'm going to attack that one. And you can, but within the rules, but we don't have to go too deep into that. And you also get the situation where you can attack free form like Hearthstone. So there's not a combat phase in Lorcana or a battle phase like in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you need to do all of your attacks, then you can do a few other things and end your turn, or like Pokemon where attacking just ends it. You can attack, play a card, do your actions in any order you want, just as long as you have the resources to do them.
I think I'd make a few less mistakes if I actually had to complete a combat phase before I moved on to the next thing, because there's a lot of times I forget to push the one. All right, so while we're saying there's some similar things, can we really say that Magic and Hearthstone are similar? Like, yes, there are some similar concepts, but in Hearthstone, you get a mana crystal every turn up until you hit 10 or 20 if you're Guff. And in Magic, you have the concept of, hey, you have to draw your lands, you have to play your lands, you can have too many lands, you can have not enough lands. Where do these factors kind of change how we think about these games, whether they're similar or different?
So famously, I'm a land system hater. I don't think that it leads to good games. And I think that the way that Hearthstone did things is smart. So having the set crystals means that nobody is going to mana flood or mana screw, which is good because it means that both players will be more likely to enjoy the game they're about to play. And there is the downside that it takes away a bit of deck building depth. Figuring out how many lands you should put in your deck is important. Figuring out how many of each color you need is important. And there's a tool I use called a hypergeometric calculator. It's not as intimidating as it sounds, but it's really good for figuring out which lands you need and how to get your ratios right. And most players don't engage with this mechanic at all. That's not a problem, but a lot of people just don't like spending their free time doing math. They want to spend their free time during playing the game. And I can respect that. So being able to sort of free players from that burden and let them decide which cards that do something actually go in the deck, and letting them play those cards and figure that out is pretty cool. And I think that that's one of Hearthstone's pros and one thing that helps separate it from others.
Another game that doesn't really have the same kind of concept as land, and I kind of think takes a page out of Hearthstone, big surprise, it was developed by Ben Brode as well, is Snap. Like, where do you think the similarities here from Snap? Is Snap more similar or different than Hearthstone, do you think?
So it's another one of those games where the thematic is different. You don't have that same board and attacking structure. There's no attacking at all. You are revealing your heroes, your cards that you're playing. Their effects happen. You can sometimes they'll destroy heroes, move heroes, give or remove power, impact the locations in some way. And while it would seem like on the surface this plays a lot differently, a lot of the principles are really similar. Building out your curve to make sure that you have the right cards of each mana cost, trying to determine what your game plan is as you draw the cards in order, makes things, kind of feel the same. But I do think that from sort of a metagame perspective, the snap mechanic really, really changes things. And I know that on our podcast last week, actually, we were joking around with what would happen if Hearthstone had a snap. And I think that would be a pretty fun, chaotic April Fool's joke if there's any Blizzard listeners here. Give us the snap next year.
I think if there was a snap, the community would snap, because they're already having a hard enough time. If there's a deck that is more powerful than others, people lose their minds. All right, so we've talked a bit about the games that are similar and games that are different, but like, what are some basic concepts we can take away from other games that we can apply to Hearthstone?
So probability is a big one. So since Magic is the granddaddy of them all when it comes to modern card games, I sort of give them the nod there. But whether it's used when you don't have to use a hypergeometric calculator to build out your land ratios, using it is pretty nice for solving other problems. So maybe you're trying to figure out your mana curve. Another one could be something like Shopper Demon Hunter. So recently this was a popular Hearthstone deck, and players were running 2 copies of Umpire's Grasp and 2 copies of Instrument Tech to try to make finding Umpire's Grasp as consistent as possible. And naturally, someone might have the question, do I really need 2 Instrument Techs? What if I were just to run 1? And a hypergeometric calculator would help you sort of solve that problem. So you can look, say, okay, I have 30 cards in my deck. My successes are the Grasps and the Instrument Tech. So 3 successes versus 1. And if I'm going first, I draw 3 cards in my opening hand, and then I get to draw 3 more going into, or 4 more going into my turn 4. And the calculator can tell you what the probability is that you have at least 1 success in those cards. So you can know, mathematically speaking, what your odds are, and then the math doing the mulligan to get replacement is a little bit more complicated. But once again, this is not a math podcast, it's a Hearthstone podcast. So the bottom line is you can actually figure out what the odds are of having that Umpire's Grasp are, and figure out if you value the consistency from 4 over the advantage of cutting the 4th card, the second Instrument Tech, to get a little bit more edge and having a stronger early game. So Magic players, because of the land system, have had a lot of experience engaging with problems like this. And, while Hearthstone has not been forced to in the same way, Hearthstone players have not been forced to in the same way, you can still use those principles to help you with your deck building and with your gameplay.
And I was going to say, I don't think you really actually need that calculator you're talking about, because pre-nerf, if you were playing against a Demon Hunter, they either had the Instrument Tech on 2, or they already had Umpire's Grasp on 3. It's just, they always had it. So I think you can just throw math out the window there.
Well, the calculator just spits out 100% in both cases, so just 1 Instrument Tech is better.
Yeah, there we go. So what else besides probability do we got here?
So identifying win conditions is another one. So a lot of the time in Hearthstone, you'll be presented with this cool new deck, and you'll be like, great. And you'll do your mulligan, you'll start playing cards, and you'll realize, oh no, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I don't know how this is going to work out. And I am sure that, a lot of us here had our first experiences with a really tough deck, like maybe Nature Shaman or Garrote Rogue in recent-ish memory. And you played the cards on curve and it didn't work out the way you wanted to. And you had to take a step back, look at the deck and think, all right, how do these pieces fit together? What does it do? And coming from a background in other games, like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon in particular, you needed to use your cards a lot more intentionally to accomplish your deck's plan and play in such a way that you were working toward a specific win condition. And most Hearthstone decks, well, you don't have to do this for, average results, get their best result when you understand the synergies and can get the most out of your cards. And if you're coming from another game, you're going to know the right questions to ask and the right places to look to see how those cards fit together. And it might just be a little bit easier for you to get those pieces of the puzzle in one place and sort of solve the problem your deck presents.
And I would say that you can even take that a step further as far as identifying weak conditions. It's one thing to know how your deck is supposed to win. Garrote Rogue, this is how you're supposed to win. But there's also the times where your deck is in a position where that main way to win is not going to be valid. You know that the opponent you're playing is going to Reno your board or whatnot, and then it's like, okay, well, my primary win condition now is likely not going to happen, so how do I identify how am I going to win now if it's not going to be plan A? What is plan B? What is plan C? And I think that is an important thing too, that you could probably not only pick up from other games like Magic. you have a 60 card deck, your win conditions, maybe you have a certain thing, but I think there's a lot more variability there because you don't always have, like, one of the nice things about Hearthstone is you have 30 card deck. You're likely to see your cards. Magic, you get 4 cards, 2 cards, whatever, but it's a larger deck. So I think being able to make those adjustments when your primary condition fails is another thing you'll probably learn from things like Magic. All right. So are there things we can take? Let's go the opposite way. Oh, is there anything more you want to say about the other games before we move on? I think we have a note here about other specific games, or.
I mean, I think I talked about what I wanted to. Let's talk Hearthstone.
Okay, so what can we take from Hearthstone that we can apply to these other games that we're playing? Like, if Hearthstone is our gateway drug, and we move on to the other games, what can we take from Hearthstone and apply to those games?
So, Hearthstone has a few features that are interesting that are not the ones that you might expect. So, I'll talk about hand reading first. And one quirk of physical TCGs and most other ones is that you can do whatever you want with the cards in your hand physically while you're watching your opponent play your turn or playing yours. You can shuffle them together. You can put them in a pile. You can put them on the table and put a die on top. You can do all of these things. And it's very difficult for your opponent to track a particular card. In Hearthstone, this isn't the case. The cards stay where they are, just right there in your opponent's hand. And if you use a deck tracker like the HS Replay one or Firestone, it lets you actually see where your opponent's cards are in their hand and see when they picked up the card, whether it was generated for something. And you can sort of practice that skill of hand reading and learning what your opponent has very intuitively in Hearthstone. And I think that on average, Hearthstone players probably have developed the skill of anticipating what's in your opponent's hand, tracking how long they've held cards, and making plays based around that better than most audiences for other games. So I think that Hearthstone skill is a good one that, while you can't see a particular card, you can think, all right, they have had a card in their hand for a while. I don't know which one it is, but maybe they haven't played it. And you can try to apply that principle even though it's not quite as strong. There's also, card economy and tempo. So in Magic, you have lands. Pokemon, you have energies. Yu-Gi-Oh, you have your garnets, which are basically their slang for Patches the Pirate-like cards that you don't want to draw that can clutter your hand. And in Hearthstone, you have a lot less of this. So it's really easy to be cognizant of your hand, what resources you have available, and track where you are in the resource war with your opponent. You can make judgments about whether you need to play more aggressively because you are running out of resources very tangibly, or in the opposite case, hunker down because you have the resource advantage and want to extend the game. And I think that Hearthstone takes this principle further than the other games that have it. There's also this concept in Hearthstone where you have that limited deck, as Tito said. And in most other games, what happens to the cards in your deck does not matter outside of really niche circumstances. If you get 4 milled, it probably is not disaster for you. It doesn't mean much. But in Hearthstone, getting 5 cards taken off your deck was enough to make Reddit break out the pitchforks. And, players hated it, and it actually did really matter in who was winning the game. And, kind of having that sort of concept of your 30 cards being your resources and needing to access them all to win a relevant number of matchups is a uniquely Hearthstone thing that you can take. And when you're playing another game, you can kind of look and say which of my resources are expendable, which ones are not. And from Hearthstone, you might have that experience parsing out the things that are indispensable. The last 2 quick ones I want to talk about are quick execution. So in other games, you are under time pressure, but Hearthstone, I think, has more time pressure than any other game. And if you want to play out your turn very, very fast, like on a deck like Togwaggle Druid in Wild, Garrote Rogue when it was in Standard, a deck like Nature Shaman, or even an Excavate Rogue where you have really complicated turns, you're going to have to learn to go fast and learn how to do the thing that your deck does well at the top level. And being able to do what your deck does well quickly is going to give you much better results in tournaments for physical games based on their. And finally, this mulligan frame of thought is based on the fact that, well, Magic is the granddaddy of the modern physical game. Hearthstone is the granddaddy of data from card games. And even though it's not all the way at its extent of where it could be taken, HS Replay, I think, is the best data site for a card game that is out there at the moment. And Hearthstone players are able to learn more about how their cards perform than people in other games. And mulligan win rate is one of these stats that's very interesting. You can see which cards are best to keep and which ones you want to get rid of. And I know from playing other games, especially, that people in my play group without this background, without that bias, don't look at their hand and say, this is the card that wins me the game on curve. I need to have this. And that way of thinking in Hearthstone can actually be pretty helpful. Star Wars Unlimited, for example, really popular right now. And you're allowed to take a mulligan. You can play any cards from your hand face down as resources. And there are some early game cards like Boba Fett on turn 3, for example, that are extremely powerful and will often win you the game when you have them. And a lot of people in my play group will have what is a serviceable hand without Boba Fett and choose not to mulligan. And that will mystify me. And I will be like, hey, what do you guys think about trying to mulligan to find a card like Boba Fett or Cartel Spacer and have your best offense immediately? And, a lot of the time but this hand is good. And, I think that a Hearthstone player might say, no, where is my Wild Spirits? Where is my Belinda? Where is my Guff? Where is my, Painter's Virtue? That's the hot one now. And they will do what it takes to get that card in their hand to try and win the game.
Fair enough. And actually, so I had a couple things throughout this that I wanted to mention. One thing, you did mention the hand reading and saying that I would push back on this a little bit. I don't think most Hearthstone players are good at hand reading. I don't think it's a skill. I think that is a skill that some people are good at. I think if the more you play, the better you're at it. But I don't think the majority of Hearthstone players even really process the fact that they can hand read. And I think that's something that we're going to talk about in the future. It is a planned future episode, but I don't think most people, and even if they realize, hey, if someone's got a card there, I probably just dawns on them at the end instead of planning around it. One thing you did mention as far as the stats and how Hearthstone and HS Replay has great stats, I'm wondering, and this is just kind of speculation and I don't know, and not really relevant, but I wonder that since Magic the Gathering Online has become a thing, I wonder if that has had an effect on the things like we're talking about. Like, have people learned from actually the stats that they're getting on Magic the Gathering Online that certain cards are better in a mulligan, certain cards are have a better play rate, certain cards are just garbage to keep in your deck? These are things that you may not realize as much if you're playing, like, you just show up to your MTG online or MTG Friday Night Magic or whatnot, and you're playing things. You may not understand that. Like, it may feel bad, it may not feel good, or it may feel great, but I wonder if the stats that people are now getting from Magic the Gathering Online are actually affecting real Magic.
I'm sure they are in some capacity. I know there's a content creator, Cirkowitz, who does a lot of content on statistics for draft that I follow pretty closely. He's a good source for that if you are into draft and learning there. And then there are sites like EtherHub. HS Replay also has a tracker for Magic Arena as well, too, that are collecting similar stats. But just, I think, if you see a Hearthstone player who is engaged and a Magic player who is engaged, I think that just because of the amount of time it's been here for Hearthstone, it's a little bit more ingrained in the community at the moment.
Sure, and that makes sense. One thing you did bring up is, like, say, Ticketus, right? Ticketus is one of those divisive cards that people either loved or hated. But one thing that's different between, like, say, Magic and Hearthstone on that is if you're playing Magic and you get cards milled, that doesn't mean they're not playable. Like, there are so many graveyard mechanics. And then you say, then they added no, your cards aren't in the graveyard, it's exiled. Well, there's also mechanics that go along with exiled. And I'm sure there's probably another graveyard mechanic that I don't even know about that they've added because they have keywords. I don't even know how many keywords Magic has. I'm sure it's a bazillion. But, like, it's interesting. Like, but with Hearthstone, your card gets milled, you burn that card. They're at this point in time, as of Memorial Day 2024, there is no interaction with those cards anymore. They're no longer in pools. You can't bring them back. They don't exist anymore. There's no reference to them. It's like if you have an object in memory and you erase the pointer to that object, you no longer can find that object. So I think that's an interesting difference between the two, because, I mean, it's almost standard now in Magic, right, that you have some ways to interact with your graveyard. I mean, I guess it's probably more black or blue or whatever, but...
Everybody.
Okay.
Delirium came back, too.
Yeah. All right, so those are some notes I had while you were talking. So we're talking about the similarities. Well, what if there are things you can bring from these other games and bring them to Hearthstone, or bring things you've learned from Hearthstone to other games, are there concepts that maybe you should leave at the game you were playing? Like, are there concepts from Magic that you shouldn't bring to Hearthstone, or try not to because they aren't quite compatible? Or are there things you learned in Hearthstone that you try to leave at Hearthstone because they're just not going to work with whatever other game you're playing?
Definitely. So I think that what you were just talking about was really touching on this well. But the understanding of disruption and combos that a person from another game will have will not get them very far in Hearthstone. So if you play a game like Magic or Pokemon, your combos are usually resilient. This means that you're expecting your opponent to have counters, that you have in your deck multiple combo pieces that are redundant and copies of the same card, so that if their counterspell, their disruption, their floodgate, call it what you will, stops your combo, then you're not dead in the water, you've just been slowed down. And eventually you might be able to get back where you need to be to win the game. In Hearthstone, this isn't the case. Like Tito was saying, if that card goes off the top of your deck, poof, it is really gone. If your Sith gets dirty ratted, or it gets milled by a card like Ticketus, bye-bye, you don't get to do your deck's thing anymore. You have lost the game. And that's not always true, but 99% of the time it is. And if you're coming from Magic, you just might not get that or have that intuition. Like, just in general, the concept of a legendary card only having one copy in your deck really does change things a lot. And in Magic, a legendary creature can only be on the board one at a time, but you can have 4 of them just chilling in your deck. And, it might at first glance not seem as valuable. Oh, yeah, I have this great legendary in my opening hand. Or, oh, yeah, I can discard this, use it to pay a cost, or just play it out early. I'll get my next one. And there is no next one. You need to think about that when it comes to both building your deck and playing the game. And I think that that's the number one difference.
And if you are playing if I'm recalling correctly, because I have not played Magic in a dog's age. If I am controlling a character named Bob the Swordsman, and you play Bob the Swordsman, one of them has to dissipate, right?
Not anymore. They have changed this. Since your heyday. It's a per player now, not a per board.
That's kind of a bummer, because I thought that was kind of an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Definitely a little bit scary when you're in that who blinks first situation and you drop yours, and then theirs just gets rid of yours and gets to do its thing. The big 2-for-1. Just brutal.
Just really quick, there are cards that like subvert the legend rule too. Like Miram, the Sentinel Worm, is one that I have where its whole thing is you play a dragon, it makes a non-legendary token copy of whatever dragon you had just played. So you could play a bunch of legendary creatures and then get token copies of them without having to sacrifice one for the legend roll. So they're doing crazy stuff with legendary creatures now.
And what you were just talking about, it made me think. So when we think of control, like, so we think of the archetypes, right? We think of like aggro, combo, control, and some people might think about mid range, but we can't talk about that because that's a dirty word. But in control, in Magic, that's some dude playing blue saying, "Oh, counterspell. Let me see if I'm going to allow you to play that. Let me think about it. Do I want to allow you to play that?" Right? And they have counterspell and interrupt and mana sink and whatever it might be. But in Hearthstone, it's board clears. I have a board clear. Oh, you played stuff? Never mind. I'm going to get rid of it. You played stuff? I'm going to get rid of it until they can get to their combo or their attrition if they're just trying to like run you out to the end of time. But they're similar, right? Like it's the same thing on some levels. Would you say, or am I kind of off base here?
I mean, I think that you're right, and that like from a macro perspective, they have this. It's the same idea, but it's just the actual execution, the cards, the boots on the ground that are the difference. And it's that instant speed interaction in Magic and other games that I think really swings the needle, or is the one that actually divides them. So, like one thing that you just cannot do in Hearthstone is float your mana and say, no, I'll pass. And then on your opponent's turn, decide what you're going to do based on what they do right then and there. You actually have to commit up front into what your opponent has done. So, like in Magic, for example, if I'm facing down a big board and my board clear can go at instant speed, I don't have to board clear it. I, as the control player, can say, go. And then when my opponent attacks, boom, there's my terminus. Boom, there's my board clear, and your stuff is gone.
But your opponent there actually then has some agency there because you can say, here's my Wrath of God, and they say, nope, here's my counterspell, right? So
right.
There are levels of complexity there that don't exist in Hearthstone.
Exactly. And like another thing that like is that difference is in deck building, you will want those tools in games that have it, not to just say no to your opponent who is doing something proactive, but no to the reactive things. So in Legends of Runeterra, Deny, which was that game's version of Counterspell, or I guess only spells, so not units, but you get the idea. You could say no. And at 3 mana, it was very, very unfair because the best aggro decks in the game would use Deny to protect their boards and make these big swings that opponents couldn't react to. And that was something that they ended up changing. And, depending on who you asked in the player base, Deny was either the most busted control tool ever and had to be nerfed, or the most busted aggro tool. It had to be nerfed. And, well, it was the aggro players that got at the axe. But I just think that that's something interesting. And, like a Hearthstone player or someone with experience in that game wouldn't see a counterspell and think, yes, this is the aggro card. And, which is weird because we had Secret Mage back in the day, but sometimes, it's perception is everything.
And I just realized that even though I think everyone here knows I'm 1 year away from 50, there's no secret there that I'm old. I feel like I've been using Boomer Magic the Gathering cards, like Wrath of God. It's probably like, oh, how old is that card, dude? But anyway.
It's still in the Commander precons. You're okay.
That's all
You're
right.
fine.
Power sync. But anyway, so one question, so this is a little outside of this thing, but do you think that Hearthstone takes advantage enough that it is a digital game? Like I know that we have like Discover and there's things that we can do there. I wish we kind of had a better log of our history of what's happened in that game. Like we can get it through third parties, but in the game, you only have that short little window of like the last 7 plays or 8 plays, whatever it is. Do you think Hearthstone takes advantage enough of the fact that it is a digital card game and not confined to the same rules as a paper card game?
So I'll say that based on what they've already done, it's very hard to come up with more. And I think that of the games that have a digital format right now, Hearthstone is at the forefront of trying to explore new things that are digital only. And I know personally, there are some more things I would want, though. So we did get the cycles of unidentified and remixed cards. So unidentified from Kobold, remixed from Festival of Legends, that have variable texture effects. And those are decided randomly, either when you draw them or they change on a turn. I'd like to see them explore that in some way where it's not random and there are things that you can do to influence which text the card has. And we have Ziliax exploring that right now in deck building, but I personally would like to see that happen in game. Another thing that Hearthstone has as an advantage as a digital game is that hidden information is not exploitable. So in a physical game, if I have a card that you can't see, there's a limit to what things I can do to interact with that card because I could cheat. And in Hearthstone, you don't get to cheat. That card is that card. So, like, we've seen it a little bit with cards that either modify cards in the hand, like Gunslinger Kurtrus or Immolate even. But I think that that's a space that they could go further into as well. And Legends of Runeterra has done this with the prank mechanic, and that had some kind of mixed results. But I think that Hearthstone could, go a little further past just hand buff and those, and find other more interesting ways to modify cards in hand.
Fair enough. So we've talked about some skills that, maybe you could take from Hearthstone. We've talked about some skills that maybe you could bring to Hearthstone. We've also talked about how their games are different and similar depending, right? We've hit a bunch of these things. What do you think there are some core skills that, regardless of the game we're playing, whether it's Hearthstone, whether it's Magic, whether it's Runeterra, whether it's Lorcana, whether it's Star Trek, The Next Generation, whatever game it might be, what do you think there are some core concept skills that we can bring with us to whatever game we're playing?
So first and foremost, I'm going to say that the reason we play games is to have fun. And if you are having fun, you are doing well. That's just getting that out of the way. But if you are looking to improve at the games and win more and have more success, then I would say that over everything, self-reflection is the most important skill. If you lose, you need to be able to be honest with yourself and say, I lost because I made a mistake, or there is something better that I could have done, or maybe, it was bad luck and you couldn't have done anything and you made the right moves, but things didn't work out. You need to be able to sort of have that capacity for self-reflection and be able to look at your replays, look at the game as it's happening, and be able to make that judgment and be honest. And that's not easy. You can't just flip a switch. Our brains are tricky and devious and are kind of egotistical. They want us to think that we're really great at what we're doing and that there's something else that's making us lose that certainly wasn't us, but it is us a lot. And once you come to terms with that, I can say personally that I find, learning from my mistakes and doing it better next time is one of the most rewarding feelings I get in any game. And practicing that skill is big.
It's actually, before we move on, it's funny you say that. I like, one thing I know is we always preach, take your replays, share them in Discords, share them with friends, go over them and learn from them because they're going to look at something. But people get so defensive when they're not used to sharing their replays because the first person will come in or someone that knows what they're doing saying, well, you mulliganed wrong here because of this. And then you did this when you probably should have done that. And people start defending their plays. It's like, well, no, I did this, I did that, I did that. It's like, well, are you here to learn? Are you here to get some feedback? Or are you here to just, justify your losing plays. And it's a tough, like you said, it's tough mentality. I mean, I think we've all done it where it's like, no, this play made sense. Well, maybe it didn't. And you have to kind of accept the feedback that you get either from yourself reviewing your plays or from people helping you out.
Yeah. And if you are the one giving the feedback, do what you can to come from a constructive place. You don't have to absolutely bash your opponent. Maybe if they're your best buddy and you want to roast them a bit for making the same mistake an upteenth time in a row, and you guys do that to each other and that's how you are, maybe go for it. But if it's your friend or teammate and it's your first time seeing their replays, they're not going to have fun if you just start going laundry list item after item of everything they could have done differently or everything they could have done a little better. It's just going to make them feel bad about themselves and probably make them not want to try again. So, on either side of it, come from a place of empathy and help the person understand that everyone makes mistakes. It's okay. And it's not. And when you said that play didn't make sense, Tito, like hypothetically, I think that a good way to put it is every play makes sense. There's always some logic, even behind wrong or bad plays that's going on. And it's not about, saying that logic is stupid. It's about finding the link in that logic where the mistake was made and redirecting it toward the right course. And I can say personally that people that I have coached and worked with and my teammates have all come, to have more success when I and others have come at it from that perspective.
Sure.
So, yeah, going into the next point is learning from others / being nice. So everyone's perspective is valuable in a strategy game. Even if their perspective does not lead to the correct conclusion, we are not all perfect at capturing every possible way to approach a situation. And a lot of us have practice. We've built up our brain's kind of muscle memory, and we do things a certain way. And sometimes that can give us tunnel vision. We might always be looking at a play from one lens and might not see something obvious. Like the example that comes up a lot is someone finding that perfect board clear when they had a lethal. And, it's really great that you cleared all the minions in the most efficient way possible. But, had you had a more open mind about the situation, you could have seen that you had an 80% chance to discover a lethal out or even a guaranteed one if you took these other actions. And some people might miss that. So talk to your friends, talk to your teammates, talk to other people who play Hearthstone, and just compare ideas. Even if you have a replay where you think you played great and you want to show your friend who's still learning and a little worse than you, show them your replay, explain your plays. And when they have questions, you might learn something too. And it's a really good way that everyone can improve. Also, just be nice to each other. The more friends you make, the more people that you meet in the community whose input that you're getting is going to give you a broader range of perspective, and it's going to make you a better player and better at adapting and solving problems.
All right. So do we have any final thoughts on this before we wrap up this topic? Doc, I know we've been talking here a bit. You got any final thoughts here?
No. Yeah, no.
Well said. DD, Dankest Dad?
When are we playing Yomi? I have it. I've played Fantasy Strike, so I know the Yomi characters because I've played the David Sterling, or I played the fighting game that they're from, but I haven't played the card game yet, and gotta add Yomi to the list of games to learn lessons from, right?
Absolutely.
Heck yeah.
All right, so
I'd be down anytime.
Doc, that was a lot of information, but I think we have room for dessert. What do you think?
Yeah, dessert sounds pretty good. So one final interview question for you, Dankest Dad. What is your favorite dessert or your favorite guilty pleasure food?
So if my mom is seeing this, I'm under duress. But I think my favorite dessert is the trifle my aunt makes like a trifle cup for dessert that's traditional in my family for Christmas Eve. And boy, I love chocolate cake. I love chocolate pudding. I love fresh made whipped cream. It's got all the good stuff in it. And that's the one.
Sounds amazing.
It is.
So, listeners, please leave us a review. We prefer 5 stars because it helps with visibility, but leave us an honest review with how you feel like the show is going. Because we want the show to be as best as it can be for us and for you. So any kind of feedback we get, we will take and assess and see how we can adjust our show to make it the best that it possibly can be. And if you email the show, we'll read it out on the show. So feel free to do that too. So Dankest Dad, where can people find you?
So you can find me on Discord as Dankest Dad. You can check out my YouTube or Twitch channel, or Dankest Dad CCG. And you can, just find me in Ohio. So if you're ever in the neighborhood, bring some trifle. Hit me up.
Tito, how about yourself?
You can find me at Twitter and Twitch at Tito Santana HS. How about yourself, Doc?
You can find me on Twitter at Doc McButt.
Dropping the blue sky, huh? Dropping the Mastodon, huh?
Yeah. This week, yeah. I'll say it next week, though.
Well, Doc, do you have any shout-outs this week?
Just big thank you to Dankest Dad for being on the show. It's always fun meeting new people, and I'm surprised. It sounds like we have some very similar Twitter circles and Discord circles as well. So I'm very surprised that this is the first time that I got to meet you, but I'm happy that I got to meet you. You've been a pleasure to have on and a great guest, so thank you.
Thank you, guys. This has been fantastic. And like I said, week with a podcast is a good week.
How about yourself, Dankest? You got any shout-outs this week?
Yeah, so give a shout-out to my AFG teammates, Nails and Lexicon, who are going into their day 2 in LA for Pokemon. Go get them, guys. And also shout-out to the Universes community and my locals here in Central Ohio. They have been great to me for the last year, and well, I feel like they have made the hobby more joyful and have got me back into diving into content. So thanks, guys. It's been cool.
Awesome. And I'm going to shout out Ridiculous Hat this week, who for weeks has, as we've said, tanked the criticism about the quest changes, as it were. And granted, it's part of his job, but he got a lot of guff, for lack of a better word. And now we have, I think, the quests in a place that are better than they used to be, in a way that gets us more experience, especially on those alt accounts, because now instead of having to win 10 games, you have to play 10 games. Now instead of having to win 10 games of Battlegrounds or Tavern Brawl, you have to just play. So I think that was a big one right there. And I want to shout out you, listener, because we're a small podcast. We're growing. We hope you guys tell other people, as we talked about. And you just tell one person, it's going to help us grow. But just last week, we do look at their numbers. And last week, it was great to see that on day 1 that we released the episode with Wikigood, the numbers just skyrocketed on day 1. And it's nice to see that when we release an episode, people listen. And it's not, we're not necessarily people's last choice, or, we're at the back of that podcast menu if you happen to listen to everything else. And it means a lot. So thank you, listeners. We appreciate it. And hopefully we can continue to get better and grow and get you more great people like Dankest Dad to talk about. But I think we're toast, guys. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Slide two brothers meet one another when they slide up to the mic. It's bread and butter with one another. Let's start up that recording light.